Some photographs are taken, others are stolen, and some, the ones that change everything, are never supposed to exist at all. Lily Carr found a memory card in a hotel hallway and made the mistake of being honest. Now a man with cold eyes and a voice like gravel is telling her she's already seen too much. And the people looking for what she found don't ask questions. They just make problems disappear. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, you already know how this ends. Drop a like and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. You won't want to look away. Chum. The memory card was the size of a postage stamp and the weight of nothing. Lily almost kicked it down the hall without noticing. She was tired. Her shoulder ached from the camera bag she'd been hauling through 3 airports in 2 days, and the Meridian Hotel's 41st floor corridor felt approximately a mile long under the kind of lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. She stopped because her boot caught the edge of it. Just a tiny resistance, a small skitter of plastic against marble, and she looked down out of reflex. A CF Express card. Expensive. The kind that costs more than most people's rent. Someone had dropped it outside room 4114. Lily picked it up. She stared at it for a moment, turning it between her fingers. There was no case, no label, just the card, bare and clean on its silver face. She looked down the corridor in both directions. Empty. The elevator at the far end closed with a sound like a held breath releasing. She should have slid it under the door of 4114 and walked the 12 steps to her own room, 4116, and gone to sleep. She had a 7 a.m. shoot at a financial conference, the kind of corporate job she took when the editorial work dried up, and she needed 4 hours minimum to function. Instead, she held onto the card and stood there for an extra 3 seconds, and those 3 seconds cost her everything that came after. The door to 4114 opened before she could make a decision either way. The man who stepped into the hallway was tall. Not gym tall, not performative tall. He was tall the way architecture is tall, like his dimensions had been calculated rather than grown. Dark suit. No tie. His jaw carried 2 days of stubble that looked less like negligence and more like control, and his eyes were a shade of gray that didn't suggest softness. He was looking at his phone when he stepped out, and he almost walked into her, and the moment he registered her presence, something shifted behind those eyes. Not fear exactly, but a rapid, precise recalibration. He saw the card in her hand before she could even form a sentence. Everything stopped. "Where did you find that?" he said. Not a question. The inflection was completely flat, which was somehow worse than if he'd raised his voice. Lily's instincts had kept her alive in conflict zones and crime neighborhoods and studios full of powerful men who wanted her to be smaller than she was. Those instincts said, "This moment matters. Be careful how you answer." "On the floor," she said. "Right here. You dropped it when you left earlier, maybe. Did you put it in anything?" Still flat. His eyes hadn't moved from the card. "I just picked it up, off the floor, 2 seconds ago." Now he looked at her face. That gray gaze moved up from her hand like he was recording information, cataloging, sorting. He was doing what she did, reading the scene. The camera bag on her shoulder. The press lanyard still clipped to the strap. The dark circles under her eyes that indicated someone who'd been traveling too long. He processed all of it in under 4 seconds. "Come inside," he said. "I don't know you." "No, you don't." He reached out, not to grab her, but to hold the door open. "But you're holding something that 3 separate people have spent the last 6 hours tearing this building apart looking for, and 2 of them are still in this hotel. So you have a choice. You come inside and I explain the situation, or you go to your room. And yes, I know it's 4116, your name is on the conference roster, and in approximately 40 minutes you'll understand why that was the worst decision." Lily's grip tightened on the memory card. "That's a threat." "That's information," he said. "Threats come with emotion. I don't have any to spare right now." She went inside. She told herself later that it was because she was a photographer and photographers move toward the story, not away from it. That was partly true. The other part was simpler. He hadn't lied to her yet, and she could usually tell when someone was lying. It was a skill you developed when you spent enough years photographing people under pressure, watching faces for the micro-expressions that leaked through before the mask settled back into place. His name was Damien Vale. She learned that in the first 30 seconds, when he moved to the room's desk with the kind of deliberate economy that suggested he'd been trained at some point, military maybe, or finance, which amounted to the same rigidity, and picked up a hotel notepad and wrote it down and slid it across to her. Like having his name on paper made the situation official, like it was a credential. She didn't give him hers. "You're a photographer," he said, not reading the lanyard anymore. He'd already filed that information. Editorial. "You're here for the Corin Group conference. You've seen the roster. I helped organize the access list." He sat down across from her, the desk between them like a border. "The memory card. Tell me exactly where you found it and exactly what position it was in." "I told you. Tell me again. Position matters." Lily set the card on the desk between them, gently, and watched his eyes track it like it might move. "Face down. About 2 feet from your door toward the elevators. Caught my boot. If I'd been walking faster, I'd have kicked it and it would have slid under the fire door." Something passed across his expression. Relief, maybe, but a very controlled version of it, pressed flat immediately. "Did you see the contents?" "I don't have a reader on me." "That's not what I asked." "I picked it up off the floor. I didn't put it in anything. I couldn't have seen the contents." He nodded slowly. Then he turned the card over once and set it back down. "There's a photograph on this card. One photograph. It documents a meeting that took place 7 weeks ago in a building in this city between a man who works for me and a man who very much does not. That meeting was not authorized. It was not sanctioned. And whoever arranged for that meeting to be documented has been trying to retrieve this card before I could look at what's on it." Lily watched his face. He was giving her the compressed version, the shape of it without the weight. She'd interviewed enough sources to recognize the shape of a truth that was being handed over carefully, with edges sanded down. "Who's looking for it?" she said. "People I trusted." The pause after that sentence was short, but it carried something she recognized. Not grief exactly, but the particular exhaustion of someone who'd discovered that what they'd built had been hollowed out from inside. And possibly people they've paid to help them, which means I don't know exactly how many, which means this floor is not a good place for either of us to remain. You could call security. Several of the people searching for this card are security. Oh, Lily sat back. The chair was expensive, deep leather, the kind that cost more per sitting than she made on a day rate. And she was suddenly aware of how tired she was and how awake she also was, that strange doubled state of exhaustion and adrenaline. "So what do you want from me?" she said. "Right now? I want to know if you looked at that card." "I told you I didn't." "You're a photographer. The instinct to put media into a reader? I said I didn't." Her voice didn't rise, but it went hard at the edges, the way it did when she'd reached the end of patience. "I don't touch other people's media. That's a professional line. I don't cross professional lines." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "All right. All right, meaning you believe me. All right, meaning I'm going to proceed as though I do." He stood. "I need to move. You shouldn't go back to your room tonight. If the people looking for this card know the roster, they know your name. Being adjacent to me makes you adjacent to this." "I don't want to be adjacent to anything." "You already are. The moment you picked it up." He looked at the card again. "You have 2 options. You go back to your room, you say nothing to anyone, you hope that whoever is looking for this decides you're not worth the trouble of questioning, or you stay close to me tonight until I can get this card somewhere safe and deal with the consequences." "Those are bad options." "Yes." "What are you offering if I stay close to you?" He met her eyes directly. "An explanation. And if it comes to it, protection." "I protect myself." "I've noticed." Something almost shifted in his face then. Not quite amusement, something more complicated. "You're still holding eye contact with a man who's just told you people are searching this building for something you were holding, and you haven't moved toward the door once. You're assessing me." "I'm a photographer. I'm always assessing." "What are you seeing?" Lily looked at him for a real beat, long enough to actually answer the question honestly. "A man who's scared but doesn't know how to be scared. Someone who gives orders and expects them to be received and is off balance because he can't give me an order. Someone who's telling me the truth but only the parts of it he's decided I need right now." She paused. "And someone who picked up a notepad and wrote his name down in the first 30 seconds, which means he wanted a record, which means he's already thinking about what this situation looks like from the outside." He was quiet for a moment. "What did that tell you?" he said. "That you're not going to hurt me. People who are planning to hurt someone don't establish paper trails." He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to the surface. "All right," he said again, and this time it meant something different. "Let me get what I need from this room. We're leaving in 4 minutes." She should have said no. She knew that. She'd known it from the second she walked through that door. But Lily Carr had spent 15 years chasing the story behind the surface, and everything in her said this one mattered in ways she hadn't found the edges of yet. She stayed. Check. The hotel had 12 floors of parking below street level, and Damien moved through the service corridor to reach them like he'd studied the building's bones in advance. He probably had. He was the kind of man who studied the bones of things before he entered them. Lily cataloged that too. She'd grabbed her camera bag before they left the floor. She hadn't even really decided to. The strap was just in her hand when she stood up, because the camera was as involuntary as breathing, and he'd looked at it but said nothing. Smart enough not to argue about what she carried. The parking structure was cold and smelled of oil and concrete and the particular staleness of enclosed underground air. Their footsteps were too loud. Damien's phone was out again, and he was moving his thumb across the screen with controlled speed, and she noticed his jaw was tight. "Someone's already left this floor," he said quietly. "The east stairwell showed movement 11 minutes ago." "You have access to the hotel's cameras." "I have access to a great many things. That's part of the problem." He stopped beside a matte black car that didn't advertise what it was, and the locks clicked open from the key fob without him pressing anything visible. The phone, probably. "Get in." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere I control." "That's not an answer." He opened the driver's side door and looked at her across the roof. "I have a secondary location, a building I own outright under a subsidiary name, nothing connected to my public profile. It's been empty for 6 months. No one who's looking for this card would think to look there because they don't know it exists." "How do you know they don't know it exists?" He paused. The pause was fractional, but she caught it. "I don't," he said. "I know they don't have reason to know. That's the best I have right now." Lily got in the car. The city came up around them as they rose from the parking structure. Manhattan at 3 in the morning, which was still more awake than most cities ever got. The streets slicked with the residue of earlier rain. The lights doubled in the wet pavement. Lily watched the rearview mirror more than the road ahead and didn't see anything following them, but following could look like nothing if it was done right. Damien drove with one hand on the wheel and his eyes cycling between the road and the mirrors with professional regularity. He wasn't talking. She wasn't asking. They were both doing the same calculation, figuring out what the other person was, what they were worth in this situation, what they'd do when the pressure changed. "Tell me about the photograph," she said. He didn't answer immediately. "You said one photograph, one meeting. Who are the 2 men?" "The man who works for me is named Garrett Cole. He's been with the organization for 9 years. He manages operational security and resource allocation for 3 of our primary divisions." A pause. "I trusted him with things that required trust." "And the other man?" Another pause. Longer. "Marcus Voss." The name meant nothing to her, and she said so. "It wouldn't," Damien said. "He's careful about that. Marcus operates through structures, companies inside companies, names attached to nothing you can trace directly to him. He's been in the ecosystem for years, building things in my peripheral vision, and I missed it." The last 4 words came out flat, but she heard what was inside them. That was the part that cost him, the missing of it. "What does he want from you?" "My organization. Or more precisely, what my organization looks like on paper versus what it is in practice. I've built something that controls a significant portion of private sector infrastructure management on the Eastern Seaboard. Logistics, data, security contracts. If someone wanted to redirect that infrastructure quietly, they'd need to either buy it, destroy it, or discredit the person running it badly enough to force a sale under duress." Lily processed that. "And the photograph?" "The photograph is evidence of a meeting where, based on what I know and what I've been able to reconstruct, Garrett Cole was given instructions for stage 3 of a plan that would frame me for a series of financial decisions I never made. Unauthorized fund movements, illegal routing of contracts. If that evidence surfaces in front of the wrong people before I can counter it, the damage to my reputation becomes the lever Marcus needs to pry the organization apart. So the people looking for the memory card are looking for it on Marcus's behalf. Because as long as I have the original documentation of that meeting, the metadata, the timestamp, the identities, Marcus's plan has a hole in it. Lily turned that over. She looked out the window at the city moving past them, at the wet streets and the lit windows of buildings where people were sleeping or working or doing any of 100 ordinary things that had nothing to do with this car or this conversation. "Why were you carrying the card in the hotel?" she said. He was quiet for a beat too long. "Damien, I was meeting someone who was going to help me verify the metadata, a technician I trusted. He never showed. When I went back to my room, I must have—" He stopped. "I was distracted. That's not something that happens to me often." "What distracted you?" "A phone call. Someone telling me that Garrett Cole had just entered the building." The car moved through an intersection. Lily watched the signal turn behind them. "He was in the hotel, tonight. For the past 3 hours based on the camera access. And you think he's one of the people searching for the card. I think he is the people searching for the card. Or at minimum, he directed them." Damien's grip on the wheel shifted. 9 years. I brought him in when the organization was half what it is now. He knows every floor of the structure. She heard it again. That particular flatness that wasn't the absence of feeling, but the compression of it. The thing she'd recognized in the hotel room. This wasn't just professional betrayal. This was the discovery that something you'd built and something you'd trusted had been the same wound. She knew that specific hurt. She'd had her own version of it. "I'm not going to tell you it gets easier," she said. He glanced at her briefly. It was the first time he'd looked away from the road or the mirrors when he didn't have to. "I didn't ask." "No, you didn't." She turned back to the window. "But you're driving a little harder than you need to. So." A very long silence. Then something that might have been a breath that contained what he wasn't going to say out loud. The building was in the lower 20s, a block from the water, the kind of structure that had been industrial and was now waiting to become something else. 6 stories, narrow face, the ground floor behind a metal shutter that looked permanent but folded back on a code. Damien punched it from the car before they parked, and by the time they were inside, the shutter was already closing behind them. The interior smelled like dust and new concrete. The smell of renovation stopped mid-process. There was exposed wire and covered floors, and the echo of a space that had been gutted but not yet filled back in. A utility light on a battery pack sat in the corner, throwing harsh white across the bare walls. Lily set her camera bag down and took the room in automatically, the way she always took rooms in. Exit points, 2 visible, probably more. Sight lines. Poor on the ground floor, the windows too high and grime filmed for visibility in or out. Temperature, cold and dry. Sounds. Nothing above the ambient city hum. Damien set the memory card on the ledge of what had once been a window frame and was now just a hole in the wall with a plywood board across it. He stood looking at it. "I need to see what's on it," he said. "Not because I don't know what's on it, because the condition of the file matters. If it's been corrupted—" "I can read it," Lily said. He turned. "I'm a photographer," she said. "I have a card reader in my bag and the software to see what's on there, including any metadata or corruption." She looked at the card on the ledge. "That's what your technician was going to do." "You're not my technician." "No. I'm better. Your technician knows what he was looking for. I don't, which means I'll see things he might have filed past because they looked normal to him." She unzipped a side pocket of the camera bag. "You want to know what's on that card? I can tell you. You tell me if I'm right about what I'm seeing, and we figure out what you actually have." He was quiet. She recognized the quality of his silence, the same precise calculation he'd been running since the hallway, measuring her against the risk. "All right," he said. Third time. She had the reader, a a compact dual-slot device that connected via USB-C to her laptop. And she was faster than she looked, pulling the laptop from the padded sleeve and opening it on the window ledge before the display had finished waking. She slotted the card. The files came up in 20 seconds. There was one image file, just one. Lily had worked with enough digital forensics in her career to know that a single file on a card that could hold 5,000 images was itself information. Someone had either deleted everything else, or this card had been used for exactly this one capture and nothing more. She opened the file. The photograph was taken at distance. Telephoto, something in the 400mm range. She could tell from the compression and the shallow field. A room seen through glass, probably from a building across a street or an angle that gave line of sight through a window. 2 men at a table. The image was sharp at center and fell away at the edges, the focus clearly pulled to the faces. She didn't recognize either man. She said so. Damien moved beside her and looked at the screen. He was very still for a moment. "The one on the left is Garrett," he said. "The one on the right is Marcus Voss." The image is clean, no artifacts, no obvious manipulation. She was already pulling up the metadata panel. Captured 7 weeks ago. Date and timestamp embedded in the EXYF. Camera make and model are... Wait. She leaned forward. The GPS data is still in here. He was very close to her now, looking at the screen over her shoulder. She could feel the change in his breathing, something that went controlled instead of loose. "It shouldn't have GPS data," he said quietly. "Whoever took this photograph would have stripped location data as a basic precaution." They stripped what they thought to strip, but there are 2 location fields in this metadata structure. The obvious one and a secondary tag that some older firmware versions write to automatically, even when location services appear to be disabled. She clicked through to the raw data. Someone using equipment from a few years back might not have even known it was recording. She could feel the weight of what she was looking at without fully understanding it yet. The coordinates were there, precise to 6 decimal points, an address embedded in the bones of the image that someone had worked to erase and hadn't entirely succeeded. "That's the building," Damien said. "The one where they met." "Yes?" His voice had changed again. Something that had been tightly coiled went tighter. "That building belongs to a company that, on paper, has nothing to do with Marcus Voss or Garrett Cole. If I can trace the ownership chain and match it to that meeting, then you have independent corroboration that doesn't rely on the photograph alone." Lily sat back. "The image proves they met. The location data proves where. If you can show that location connects to Marcus Voss's network, the story becomes airtight." He straightened. "I need someone with access to corporate registry data, and I need this image authenticated independently so it can't be challenged as fabricated." "Authenticated how?" "Forensic image analysis. Proof that the metadata has not been altered, that the image itself is original capture and not a composite." He looked at her. "Is that something you can do?" "I can do part of it. Full forensic authentication requires specialized software, error level analysis, clone detection. I have some of those tools, but not all." She looked at the screen, at the 2 men sitting at a table in a room with precise GPS coordinates embedded in the light. "How much time do we have? Before Marcus moves to Plan B?" He considered it the way he did everything, without drama, with that particular compression that made him look like he was adding numbers. If he sent people to the hotel and they come back without the card, he'll know I have it. He won't wait. He'll accelerate. He paused. Hours. Maybe less. Lily looked at the image on her screen, the face of Garrett Cole, who'd sat across from a man building an empire in the shadow of the man who trusted him, and had let himself be made into a tool. She'd photographed people in collapse before. The moment when what someone had chosen finally became visible in their face. She wondered if Garrett Cole had looked like that, if the man who'd taken this image through a window from a building across the street had caught it or missed it. "I need to run some analysis on this," she said. "Give me 2 hours." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She pulled up the first analysis tool in her software library. "But I'm already in it, and I want to know what's actually on this card." She looked at him directly. You said I could see the truth in images that everyone else filters past. So let me look. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he pulled up a folding chair from somewhere in the gutted room's shadows and sat about 6 feet away where he could see both the door and the screen. And he didn't hover, and he didn't give her any more instructions. She appreciated that more than she expected to. She worked in the way she always worked, systematically, without impatience, the way some people meditate, which was to say, completely absent from herself and entirely inside the problem. The analysis tools ran their cycles. She cross-checked metadata fields against known database standards. She ran error-level analysis on the image to look for compositing seams or pixel manipulation, the digital fingerprints of a fabricated image. There weren't any. The photograph was real. The meeting had happened. The two men at the table in the room, with the precise address embedded in forgotten metadata, had sat across from each other 7 weeks ago and had not known they were being photographed. That was what she saw first. What she saw second took her longer to articulate. She backed out to the full image and looked at it the way she looked at her own frames. Not for confirmation of what she expected to find, but for what was actually there. The composition, the angle, the precise moment the shutter had been pressed. The photographer knew what they were doing, she said. Damien looked up from his phone. Most surveillance photography, but even professional surveillance, catches the subject, gets the faces. The goal is documentation, not image making. This is different. She pointed at the screen without touching it. Look at the framing. The light source is behind and to the left. They've waited for Garrett Cole's face to turn at a specific angle. Here, you can see the light catching the full plane of his face, both eyes visible. Same with Voss, though the angle is shallower. Someone took this photograph who understood that the image needed to be legible, irrefutable. They composed this. Damien was beside her now. What does that tell you? That whoever took this image either had professional training or significant experience, and that they took it with intention. This wasn't someone documenting a meeting and hoping for the best. They planned the shot. She looked at it for another moment, which means whoever took this was not Marcus Voss's team. His team would have shot quickly and run. This person waited for the right moment. A third party, Damien said slowly. Someone who knew about the meeting and was documenting it for their own reasons. Not to hand to Marcus. Not to use as leverage the way Marcus's people would have. She turned to look at him. Do you know anyone who would have reason to document this meeting independently? Someone who knew about Garrett's involvement but wasn't inside your organization. His expression shifted. She watched it happen. The recalibration, the pulling up of something from a specific file in his memory. There's someone, he said carefully. A woman named Rena Yates. She was a compliance auditor I brought in 18 months ago to do a structural review. She found some irregularities, things that pointed in a direction I didn't fully pursue at the time, which I now... He stopped. She submitted a report that I accepted at surface value. She left the contract quietly. If she'd continued investigating independently, she might have found Garrett and known that the only way to make you see it was an image you couldn't dismiss. Lily looked at the photograph again. Someone protecting your organization by doing the thing you weren't doing. By going outside the organization entirely. Yes. She closed the analysis window and looked at the raw file data once more. The card was on the floor outside your room, Damien, in the hallway. It wasn't planted there. It wasn't left there by someone trying to frame you or bait you. It was dropped by accident. She looked at him. Someone tried to get this to you tonight and lost it in transit. If I hadn't been there, it would have slid under the fire door. He stood very still. The utility light threw his shadow long against the bare wall. Rena, he said quietly, not quite to her. Or someone she sent. Either way, the card was coming to you. Someone was trying to arm you. The silence held for a moment. Then his phone vibrated against his palm, and the expression that crossed his face when he looked at the screen was not the controlled compression she'd seen all night. It was something else, something that was almost recognition. Marcus Voss just requested an emergency meeting, he said. He's reached out through a mutual contact. He says it's about a misunderstanding he wants to resolve. Lily felt the cold in the room change character. He knows you have it. Yes. How fast can he move? Damien looked up from the phone. The gray of his eyes in the utility light was the shade of weather about to break. "He's already moving," he said. "That message is not a request. It's reconnaissance. He's telling me he knows I have the card, and he's giving me the chance to respond before he escalates." His jaw tightened. He's going to pivot. If he can't recover the card, he'll try to make its existence irrelevant. How? By getting a confession, or something that sounds like one. He set the phone face down on the ledge. Marcus doesn't need the card if he has my voice saying the meetings were sanctioned. One recorded statement taken in the right context could bury everything the photograph documents. Lily looked at the memory card sitting beside the phone, at the image still open on her screen. 2 men at a table. One of them, a man who had spent 9 years learning the architecture of something just so he could quietly take it apart. "So what do you do?" she said. "I have to respond," Damien said. "If I go silent, he interprets that as preparation. He'll move harder and faster." He looked at her. The calculation was there again, but underneath it something she hadn't seen from him yet. Something that was close to asking, not ordering, not instructing, asking. "I have to face him," he said. "And I need someone in that room who understands what he's doing before he does it." The utility light hummed. Outside, somewhere above them, the city continued its indifferent noise. Lily looked at the photograph on her screen one last time. The precise angle, the light catching both faces at the exact right moment, the image of someone who had waited for the truth to be perfectly visible before pressing the shutter. "Tell me where," she said. And somewhere in the building above them, in a room they hadn't reached yet, something moved. She heard it at the same time he did. A sound above the ambient hum. A footstep that was trying not to be a footstep and failing. The way footsteps always fail on concrete when there's nothing else to absorb them. 1 floor up, maybe 2. The building had been empty for 6 months, and that sound had no reason to be in it. Damien was on his feet before she could speak. He moved to the utility light and killed it with a single press, and the room went to the dimmer quality of city glow through filmed windows, the orange-gray light of Manhattan at 4 in the morning coming in sideways, enough to see shapes and distances. His hand went to her arm, not grabbing, just a brief firm contact that said move, and she moved with him toward the inner wall, away from the windows, where the shadow was complete. They stood in the dark and listened. The footstep came again, slower, deliberate. Someone in the building who knew they were trying to be quiet and wasn't quite managing it. Not a random entry. Not a building inspection. Someone who had found them. Lily had her phone in her hand. Not to call, the screen would be visible. Just to have it. Her thumb was over the camera app because old instincts don't die, they just change form. Damien had something in his hand too. She couldn't see what it was in the dark. The sound stopped. Silence for 15 seconds. 20. Long enough that the silence itself became information. Then a voice came from the stairwell. Not loud, not quiet, the kind of carry that said professional. "Mr. Vale, I'm not here to recover the card." Damien's grip on her arm didn't change. "My name is Rena Yates," the voice said, "and I've been trying to get to you for 6 hours. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man who has just had a calculation confirmed and isn't sure yet whether that makes things better or considerably worse. Lily felt his hand release her arm, and above them, on the stairs, the sound of someone who had been waiting too long finally beginning to move. Rena Yates came down the stairs. The way people come downstairs when they've been running for hours, and their body has stopped cooperating, but their mind refuses to acknowledge that. One hand on the rail, each step absorbing more weight than the last, the specific gait of someone who has pushed past the point where movement feels voluntary. She was mid-40s, compact, with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of face that had learned to show nothing as a professional habit. There was a cut above her left eyebrow, dried but not old. Her jacket was torn at the shoulder seam. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at Damien in the city glow light from the filmed windows. Then she looked at Lily. Her eyes did a fast assessment. Camera bag, posture, position relative to Damien. And whatever calculation she ran it fast and filed it. "Who is she?" Rena said. "Someone who found the card in the hall," Damien said, "before your courier could retrieve it." My courier dropped it because someone grabbed him in the stairwell. Rena's jaw was tight. He's fine. He's out of the building. But the card? I have the card. Damien looked at the cut above her eye. What happened? Garrett's people have been in this city since this afternoon. 3 of them. That I've confirmed. Possibly more. She moved to the window ledge and leaned against it. Not casual, just using the wall to stay upright. I've been running a parallel track for 4 months, since I left the contract. I found the GPS data in the image file 2 weeks ago, and I've been building corroboration ever since, but I needed you to have the original card first, because without the original metadata, the chain of custody breaks, Lily said. Rena looked at her. A longer look this time. Yes. A pause. She knows image forensics. She's a photographer, Damien said. That's not the same thing. In this case it is, Lily said. I've already run ELA on the file. The image is unmanipulated. The metadata is intact, including a secondary GPS tag that wrote to a field most people don't know to strip. She watched Rena's face. You knew about that tag. Something shifted in Rena's expression. Not surprise. The opposite. Recognition. I knew there was a chance it would survive. Older firmware, the right conditions. She looked at Damien. I couldn't tell you in advance what I was building. If Garrett was monitoring your communications, he was, Damien said, flat. Then anything I sent you directly would have flagged. I had to stay outside the organization's communication channels entirely. She exhaled. It was a rough sound, the kind that carries the weight of 4 months of working alone. I know what that cost. I know how it looks. But if I'd come to you 6 months ago with what I suspected and no proof, Garrett would have known I was close, and the card would have disappeared along with anything else that could touch him. Damien was looking at her with that precise gray stillness. Lily had learned enough about his face in a few hours to know that the stillness was not neutrality. It was the expression he wore when he was processing something that touched something else, something older. You left the contract quietly, he said. I thought you were done. I was done with the contract. I wasn't done with what I found. Rena held his gaze. I know you reviewed my report and moved on. I know you thought I was being cautious to the point of overreach. I know you trusted Garrett more than you trusted my findings. She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it like someone reading coordinates, factual, precise. I wasn't wrong. The silence after that sat in the room like a third person. Damien didn't look away from her. He said nothing for long enough that it became its own form of admission. No, he said finally. You weren't. Rena nodded once. She didn't push it. She didn't make him sit in it longer than that. Lily noted that, the economy of it, the decision not to extract anything more from the moment than the acknowledgement itself. Marcus Voss reached out to me 20 minutes ago, Damien said. Rena went very still. He wants a meeting. He's framing it as resolution. He picked up his phone from the ledge and showed her the message. She read it twice. Lily could see her eyes track the text a second time, and then she set the phone back down carefully, like it was something that might break. He knows you have the card, she said. That's what we've established. Then he's not trying to recover it anymore. She looked up. He's going to try to make it not matter. If he can get you into a room and record you saying anything that can be cut to sound like an authorization, I know. You can't go. I can't not go. Damien moved away from the wall into the center of the room, the city glow catching the side of his face. If I refuse contact, he interprets that as me preparing to move against him. He'll accelerate everything. Whatever the next phase of his plan is. He stopped. What is the next phase? What have you built? Rena reached into her jacket, in her pocket, the practiced reach of someone who'd been keeping documents on her body, and pulled out a folded envelope. She opened it and spread 3 printed pages on the window ledge beside Lily's laptop. Corporate registry printouts, routing information, a structural diagram drawn by hand in the margins. 3 companies, she said, registered in Delaware, Nevada, and a registered agent in Singapore. None of them list Marcus Voss anywhere in their documentation, but the beneficial ownership chains run to him through 2 layers of nominee directors. She pointed to the hand-drawn diagram. The first company holds a consulting contract with one of Damien's subsidiaries. The contract was signed 14 months ago by Garrett Cole under a delegated authority that Garrett himself approved in a board resolution 8 months before that. Lily leaned in. Garrett gave himself the authority to sign the contract. In a resolution that was buried inside a package of routine governance documents. 22 items on a consent agenda. Number 17. Reina's finger moved to a line on one of the printouts. The contract routes fees to the first company. The first company distributes to the second. The second makes loans, yichol, documented, fully papered loans, to a third entity that is currently holding purchase options on 3 of Damien's division-level subsidiaries. The room was very quiet. Lily looked at the diagram and then at Damien's face. "He's already inside it," she said. "He's been inside it for 14 months, Reina said. "The photograph is the most visible piece of evidence, but the financial architecture is what actually matters. If those purchase options are exercised, they can't be exercised unless I'm removed or sufficiently discredited," Damien said. His voice hadn't changed, but something in the room had. "The options are contingent. Contingent on a regulatory finding, a criminal referral, or a board-level vote of no confidence." Reina looked at him directly. "All 3 of which become significantly more likely if Marcus can produce evidence, or the appearance of evidence, that you authorized the fund movements that built this structure." "Which he tries to get tonight," Lily said, "in whatever room he's proposing." "Yes." Lily looked at the pages on the ledge, at the hand-drawn diagram with its chains of ownership running like roots through soil you couldn't see. She thought about the photograph on her laptop screen, the 2 men at the table, the light caught exactly right, the image that had waited 7 weeks in a piece of plastic the size of a postage stamp to mean something. "The photograph puts Garrett and Marcus in a room together," she said. "The financial structure shows what they built, but there's still a gap." She looked at Reina. "Can you prove the instructions Garrett received in that meeting are reflected in the actions he took afterward? That what happened in that room translated directly into what you've traced in the corporate structure?" Reina hesitated. It was the first hesitation Lily had seen from her. "I have circumstantial correlation. The timing of Garrett's governance resolutions tracks against the meeting date, but a direct link—" She stopped. "I need Garrett to have communicated something. Email, message, document, something that shows he received instructions at that meeting and then acted on them. And you don't have that." "Not yet." Damien had been listening to this exchange the way he listened to everything, completely, without interrupting, filing it somewhere that she was increasingly certain had a very good organizational system. "Garrett is in the city tonight," he said. "You said that." "I confirmed 3 of his people. I believe Garrett himself is here, but I haven't placed him directly." "He's in the hotel," Lily said. Both of them looked at her. "Damien told me in the car. Camera access showed movement in the east stairwell." She looked at Damien. "If Garrett is running the search for the card, he's coordinating from somewhere close. He wouldn't delegate that entirely." "He'd want to know the moment it was found," Reina said slowly. "Or the moment it was confirmed lost." "Which means he's waiting for a report that hasn't come," Damien said. "And the longer it doesn't come, the more he knows something went wrong." The 3 of them stood in the room with the information settling between them like sediment. Lily could feel the hours in her body now, the specific heaviness of 4 a.m. on a night that had begun as nothing and become this. And she pressed it back because pressing it back was a skill she had, the same skill that let her stand in difficult places and keep seeing. "I need to respond to Marcus," Damien said. "But before I do, I need to know what I'm walking into. Not just what he wants, what he actually has. If he's already moved to the next phase, he has cards of his own." He looked at Reina. "You've been inside this for 4 months. What does he have that I don't know about?" Reina was quiet for a moment that ran a beat too long. "Tell me," Damien said. "There's a recording," she said. The quality of the air in the room changed. "It's not of you," she said quickly. "It's of a phone call between Garrett and the compliance director of one of your divisions, taken 6 months ago. On the call, the compliance director refers to an internal authorization process that, out of context, sounds like it describes the fund movement structure. The actual authorization was for something else entirely. But Marcus has the recording, and he has an interpretation of it prepared. Damien's jaw had gone tight in a way that changed the shape of his face. Who is the compliance director? Sandra Ewan. She's been with me for 11 years. She didn't do anything wrong. The call was ordinary, but Garrett recorded it without her knowledge, and Marcus has been holding it. Rena held his gaze. If he plays it in front of the right people, with the right framing, before you have a chance to contextualize it, it becomes part of the picture he's building. Damien turned away. Just for a moment. 3 steps across the room and back, the only physical expression she'd seen him give to anything this night. Then he stopped. He's been building a parallel record. 1 photograph, 1 recording, the financial structure. 3 separate pieces of evidence that each look like something different individually, but together form a version of events where I knew about and approved everything. Yes, Rena said. And tonight he wants to add my voice to that collection. Yes. Damien looked at the wall for a moment. Lily watched him from the side. The line of his profile, the precise economy of his stillness. She'd photographed men in crisis before, and the ones who frightened her were never the ones who shouted. They were the ones who went completely quiet and did their thinking somewhere you couldn't see. Then I'm going, he said. Rena's exhale was sharp. Damien, not because I have no choice, because I have information he doesn't know I have. He looked back at them. He knows I have the card. He doesn't know what else I have. He doesn't know about the corporate registry trace, the ownership chains, or the fact that I now have someone who's built a 4-month case from the outside. He looked at Lily. And he doesn't know about her. Lily felt the shape of what he meant before he said it. He's going to try to record me, Damien said. He'll have the room wired. Every word I say will be captured and available for reinterpretation. He was still looking at Lily. But if I'm not the only one recording, you want a second record? Lily said. I want an independent witness who understands what she's seen in real time. Not a bodyguard, not a lawyer. Someone who can read the room the way you read an image, for what's actually there versus what someone wants you to see. Rena said, that puts her directly in Marcus's line of sight. I know. She's not part of this. She found a card on a floor. She's been part of it since she picked it up, Damien said. I told her that in the hotel. She made her own decision. They were talking about her in the third person, the way people do when they're having an argument they're not sure the third party should win. Lily let it run for exactly as long as it needed to. I'm going, she said. Rena looked at her. Not because he's asking me to, Lily said. Because I looked at that image and I understand what's at stake in it. And because the thing Marcus is trying to do, rewrite a record, control what the evidence means, make a false version of events permanent, that's the thing I've spent 15 years fighting in my own work. She met Rena's eyes. People have done it to me. I know what it looks like from inside it. And I know what it looks like from outside it through a lens. A silence. Rena looked at Damien. Something passed between them that had the weight of 4 months of parallel work and the specific gravity of trust that had been tested and hadn't broken. The meeting location, Rena said. Marcus will choose somewhere he controls. You need to counter-propose or at minimum scout it first. He suggested a property downtown, a private dining room in a building on 48th. He has an office there. Damien picked up his phone. I know the building. Then I need to know the floor plan. Rena was already folding the papers back into her envelope. And we need to move before 5 a.m. because if Garrett's people haven't reported back by then, the calculus changes. Lily closed her laptop. The image of Garrett Cole and Marcus Voss went dark. She slid the memory card into the inner pocket of her jacket, not the camera bag, her body, because bodies were harder to separate from people than bags, and zipped it closed. Damien was watching her do it. You should know something, he said. His voice was quiet enough that Rena, 3 feet away, might not have caught it clearly. Tell me. Marcus Voss is not a man who escalates carelessly. He doesn't threaten because he's frightened. He threatens because he's already moved his pieces and the threat is just notification. He held her gaze. When he sent that message, he was telling me the game had changed. He's already made his next move. We just don't know what it is yet. Lily thought about the photograph, the light. The patient's required to wait for exactly the right moment before pressing the shutter. Neither did Garrett, she said. When someone took that picture of him, something crossed Damien's face. Not quite what she'd call warmth. Something older and less comfortable than warmth. The expression of a man being seen accurately and not being sure yet whether that was a relief or a problem. No, he said. He didn't. Rena moved to the door that opened onto the street-level side of the building and put her hand flat against it and listened for 3 full seconds before she turned the handle. Clear, she said. They went out into the 4 a.m. city, where the air was cold and damp and carried the smell of the river, and the streets held the particular emptiness that isn't absence but waiting, the hour before the city remembers itself and starts again. Lily's boots were quiet on the wet sidewalk. Her camera bag was on her shoulder. The card was against her ribs. She thought about what Damien had said. He's already made his next move. She thought about the shape of the trap they were walking toward, and how a trap only works on someone who doesn't know it's a trap, and how knowing it's a trap and walking in anyway requires something different from courage. It requires the specific willingness to let the trap close around you because you've already built the thing that springs it from inside. She knew that feeling. She'd had to learn it the hard way, in rooms full of powerful people who wanted her smaller, who wanted her work to belong to them, who had tried to take what she'd made and make it theirs. She'd learned to let them try. Because the thing about truth is that it's structural. It doesn't disappear when someone builds a story over the top of it. It waits. Patient as a photograph in a drawer, patient as coordinates embedded in forgotten metadata, patient as an image of 2 men at a table in a room whose address is written in light that no one thought to erase. Ahead of her, Damien's phone lit up in the dark. He stopped walking. She saw his face in the screen glow, and she saw the thing on his face that was not the controlled compression she'd seen all night. "What?" she said. He turned the phone toward her. The message on the screen was 3 words from a number she didn't recognize, but the number had a name attached to it in Damien's contacts. The name was Sandra Ewan, the compliance director. 11 years. The woman whose call had been recorded without her knowledge and handed to Marcus Voss as a weapon. The 3 words were, "They have Garrett." Lily read them twice. "Marcus has Garrett," Damien said quietly. Not a question. "Or Garrett went to Marcus," Rena said from behind them. Damien looked at the message for a moment longer. Then he put the phone in his pocket and looked at the street ahead of them, at the wet, empty block and the distant lights of the city beyond it. "Either way," he said, "the meeting just became something different than a negotiation." And in that moment, standing on a wet sidewalk at 4 in the morning with a memory card against her ribs and the shape of a trap becoming visible in the dark, Lily understood that they had just passed the point from which there was no version of going back. Sandra Ewan's message had 3 words and no punctuation, and that absence, the missing period, the lack of anything that signaled a complete thought, told Lily more than the words themselves. People under controlled stress still punctuate. People in genuine fear type and send before the sentence is grammatically finished. Damien was already moving. Back toward the car, not away from it, and Rena fell in beside him with the automatic adjustment of someone who had learned to read his direction changes without being told. Lily moved with them because standing still on a wet sidewalk at 4 in the morning with a memory card in your pocket and no context was not a viable option. "Sandra wouldn't contact me directly unless she had no other channel," Damien said. He was unlocking the car from 6 feet out. "She knows my communication lines may be compromised. If she sent this, she sent it because it was the fastest way to reach you regardless of who else might see it," Rena said, "which means she's not worried about being monitored anymore. Because whoever is monitoring already knows what she knows." "Yes." They got in the car. Damien had the engine running before Lily's door was closed. He pulled onto the empty street with the controlled speed of someone who wanted to move fast and knew that moving too fast was its own kind of visibility. "Call her," Lily said. "If Marcus has Garrett and Garrett has given up Sandra's name, call her," Lily said again. "She sent you that message. She's already past the point of trying to stay quiet. She needs to know you received it." A beat. Then Damien's hand moved to the console and the car's system connected a call on speaker. It rang 4 times, long enough that Lily counted them, long enough that the fourth ring had a different quality than the first, and then Sandra Ewan picked up. She sounded like someone who had been awake for 30 hours and was keeping her voice flat by force of will alone. "Mr. Vale, I have your message," Damien said. "Tell me what you know." A pause. The sound of movement. She was walking somewhere, her footsteps coming through the call. "Garrett came to my apartment 2 hours ago. He didn't come alone. There were 2 men with him, and they weren't security. Not ours." Another pause. "He told me Marcus Voss had a recording of a call I made 6 months ago regarding the Delrin authorization process. He said if I didn't provide a written statement saying that you had verbally authorized the Cole-Voss consulting structure, he threatened you? He told me that my name was already in documents that Marcus had prepared and that confirmation would protect me. Refusal would make me look like I was covering for you." Her voice didn't break. It was the voice of someone who had gotten very far past the point where breaking was an option. "He had a tablet. He played me part of the recording." "What part?" "The section where I described the authorization pathway for Delrin. He had it cut so that my explanation, the actual Delrin process, sounds like I'm describing the routing structure for the subsidiary loans." A sharp exhale. "It doesn't sound like a cut. It sounds seamless. He had someone edit it so the beginning of one sentence connects to the ending of another, and the join is, I couldn't hear it. I was listening for it, and I couldn't hear it." Lily felt the cold of the car's interior differently now. She'd heard of audio manipulation at this level. Not theoretical, not hypothetical, but the professional capability that existed in post-production houses and intelligence operations, and apparently in whatever infrastructure Marcus Voss had been building for the past several years. "Did you sign anything?" Damien said. "No." The word came fast. "No, I told him I needed to review it with counsel. He gave me until 8 a.m. A pause. "Mr. Vale, where are you?" "Somewhere safe." "You need to be somewhere safe too, not your apartment." "I can go to my sister's, Bob. Not anywhere Garrett knows about." "Does he know your sister?" A silence that was its own answer. "A hotel," Damien said. "Pay cash if you can. Check in under a variation of a name, middle name, maiden name, something real enough that you'll respond to it." He glanced at Rena. "Can you coordinate her location?" "Send me her number when we hang up," Rena said toward the phone. "I'll manage it." "Sandra." Damien's voice changed slightly. Not softer exactly, but less compressed. "What they have is a fabrication. But I need you not to say anything to anyone until I can counter it. Can you hold until 8? "I can hold." Another pause, and under the flatness of her voice there was something that sounded like the particular loneliness of someone who has just discovered that the structure they worked inside was not what they thought it was. "Mr. Vale, I've been with the organization for 11 years. "I know." "I want you to know that I never ushul." "I know," he said again. And this time the compression in his voice was the compression of someone holding something that would break if he let it out in a car moving through Manhattan at 4 in the morning. "Get somewhere safe. Rena will contact you in 30 minutes. He ended the call. The car moved through 2 more blocks of silence. The city outside was the color of old silver, the streets empty enough that their headlights made something almost like loneliness on the wet pavement. "He has the recording," Rena said. Not a question. "He has a version of it," Damien said. "For the people who need to make a decision about your organization, a version may be enough." She was looking straight ahead through the windshield. The photograph, the financial structure, the recording, and now, if Garrett is with him, a live witness who can describe the internal authorization processes from inside the organization. She paused. Marcus didn't move Garrett. Garrett went to Marcus. That's different. How is it different? Lily said. Because if Marcus had taken Garrett, Garrett is a liability. Someone who might talk if the pressure came from another direction. But if Garrett went to Marcus voluntarily, it means Garrett has already made his calculation. Rena turned to look at the side of Damien's face. It means Garrett has decided you're losing. The silence that followed that sentence had a particular weight. Lily watched Damien's profile in the city glow light. His jaw was set and his eyes were on the road, and he did not react to what Rena had said in any visible way, and that absence of reaction was the most precise thing she'd seen from him all night. "Where does Marcus want the meeting?" Rena said. 48th? A private dining room in a building he keeps an office in. Damien checked his mirrors. He'll have the room configured, recording devices that won't be visible, probably multiple overlapping systems so that even if I find one, I miss the others. He'll want to sit me down with Garrett present and try to create a version of this conversation that corroborates what he already has. "Then we need to be in that room before you arrive," Rena said. "The building will have security." "I know the building," Rena said. "I've done 2 walkthroughs in the past 6 weeks on the assumption that it might come to this." She said it without pride, just information. The statement of someone who had been thinking 6 weeks ahead of a situation that was only now catching up. "There's a service entrance on the west side. The dining room on 14 is used for private events. It has a prep kitchen attached and a separate service corridor. If I can get into that corridor before your meeting begins, you'd be in the room," Lily said. "Adjacent to it. The prep kitchen shares a wall and has a pass-through. It's designed to be discreet." She paused. "But I need someone in the room itself, someone with a reason to be there that Marcus accepts." Both of them looked at Lily. She had known this was coming since the wet sidewalk, since Damien had looked at her in the gutted building and said he needed someone who could read the room the way she read an image. She'd said yes then, and the yes was still the same yes. "What's my reason for being there?" she said. "You're my photographer," Damien said, "documenting the meeting at my request, a record for my own purposes." He glanced at her briefly. "Marcus won't like it, but refusing it outright would look like he had something to hide, and Marcus is too careful for that. He'll allow you in the room, and he'll manage around you." "He'll think he can manage around me." "Yes." Lily thought about the photograph on her laptop, the patience of it, the waiting for the right moment, the understanding that the truth in an image isn't just in what's there, but in what the subject doesn't know you're seeing. "I need to know what I'm looking for," she said. "Not what you want me to document, what I should watch for, the moments Marcus doesn't control." Damien thought for a moment. "Watch Garrett, not Marcus. Marcus will be performance. He's built his career on managing how he presents. But Garrett has been living inside this for 9 years, and he made a decision tonight that is irreversible. That kind of decision does things to people." He paused. "Watch for the moment he stops looking at Marcus and starts looking at the floor." Lily filed that. "And watch for anything Marcus does with his hands when he's not speaking," Rena added. "He has a tell. He straightens objects on surfaces, glasses, phones, anything in reach. He does it when he's recalculating. When the room is going somewhere he didn't plan." "Has he seen me before?" Lily said. "From the conference roster. Anything. Your name is on the Corin Group access list," Damien said. "But your photograph isn't publicly attached to your press credentials. He'd have to specifically search for you." He paused. "I think we have time to move before he does that." "You think?" "Yes." She appreciated that he didn't say more than that. She appreciated that he didn't dress up probability as certainty. She'd worked with enough people who did the opposite to know what it cost, that specific tax on reality that came from being told things were safer than they were. They drove for another 8 minutes in a silence that had the quality of people doing internal preparation rather than people with nothing to say. Then Damien pulled the car to a stop on a side street and looked at Rena. "I need to respond to Marcus," he said. "Confirm the meeting. Give him enough certainty to stop moving laterally and commit to the room." He picked up his phone. "What time?" 6:30, Rena said. "It gives me enough time to get into the service corridor, and it's early enough that his full security apparatus won't be in place. His people work in the structure of business hours even when the business isn't." "And it gives Sandra until 8, Lily said. "If we resolve this by 8, he never gets his statement." Rena looked at her. For the first time, there was something in her expression that wasn't pure assessment, something that might have been, in different circumstances, the beginning of respect. "Yes," Damien typed the message. Lily watched his thumb move across the screen, the careful construction of a sentence that needed to sound like a man responding from a position of controlled reaction rather than a man who had spent the last 4 hours building a counterstructure. He showed it to Rena before he sent it. She read it, nodded. He sent it. The reply came in 40 seconds. which meant Marcus had been holding his phone waiting for it, which meant Marcus was not as calm as his message had presented him. Lily noted that when Damien showed her the screen, not the content, the response time. "He's eager," she said. "He's close," Damien said. "He can see the finish line." He put the car in drive, which makes him the most dangerous version of himself. They split up 2 blocks from the building on 48th. Rena went west toward the service entrance with the folded pages in her inner pocket, and the particular walk of someone who has already solved the problem of getting through the door and is only managing the physical distance remaining. Damien parked on the east side. They had 40 minutes. They meant him. Lily used 20 of them in the car with her laptop open, transferring a compressed copy of the analyzed image file to a cloud archive she controlled, a server she'd been paying for herself for 7 years, the kind of infrastructure you build when you've had your work taken from you and learned not to keep anything in only one place. She sent the archive link to an email account that had no connection to her professional identity and CC'd a second account with a time delay send set for 7 a.m. If no one canceled the delay, the analysis and the metadata and the GPS coordinates would arrive in the inbox of a journalist she trusted, not a friend, a person she had professional respect for, along with a document she wrote in 12 minutes that explained what the file contained and where it had come from. It was an insurance policy. Not elegant, but the kind of thing you build when you've learned that elegant doesn't keep you safe. Damien watched her do all of it without speaking. When she closed the laptop, he said, "Who gets the 7 a.m. email? Someone who will know what to do with it. Someone you trust. Someone I trust professionally." She put the laptop in the bag. "That's not the same thing as personally, but it's the kind of trust that holds up better under pressure." He was quiet for a moment. "That was the right thing to do." "I know. I didn't tell you to." "I know that too." She met his eyes. "If this goes wrong in that room, the evidence still gets where it needs to go. That's the point." He looked at her for a moment in the early morning half-dark of the parked car, and she had the sensation she sometimes had behind the viewfinder, the particular awareness of a moment that was real in a way most moments weren't, the sense of genuine exposure, of something being visible that usually wasn't. He looked away first. "We should go," he said. The building on 48th had a lobby that communicated money through restraint. Nothing showy, just quality, the kind of interior that said everyone who belongs here already knows it. The security desk had one person at this hour, and Damien walked past it with his name already in the system, the appointment already logged, and Lily one step behind him with her camera bag on her shoulder and her press lanyard visible in the specific posture of someone who goes where she's supposed to go without needing to be told twice. The elevator opened on 14 without a key card because Damien had one, and the corridor beyond it was the carpeted quiet of a floor that hosted private events for people who didn't want their private events known about. The dining room was at the end of the corridor. The door was already open. Marcus Voss was standing at the window when they walked in, looking at the city coming into the first gray of dawn, and he turned when he heard them, the way people turn when they've been waiting and have decided to make the waiting look like patience rather than urgency. He was shorter than Lily had imagined. Not short, but the kind of height that disappeared in a well-cut suit, redistributed into proportion and presence. His hair was silver at the temples. His face had the quality of a face that had learned to be readable only when it chose to be. He looked at Damien first, then at Lily. His gaze moved across the camera bag, the lanyard, her face. "I wasn't expecting a third party," he said. "My photographer," Damien said. "I document significant meetings." A pause. Marcus's expression didn't change. His right hand moved to the table beside him and adjusted the position of a water glass by approximately half an inch. Rena's tell. Lily filed it immediately. "Of course," Marcus said. His voice was pleasant. The pleasantness was the most dangerous thing in the room. "Please, sit." They sat. Damien across from Marcus, Lily at the corner, camera up, which was where a documentary photographer would be, and which also gave her a sight line on both Marcus and the second door, the one that led to the prep kitchen corridor, behind which Rena was presumably now in position. Garrett Cole walked in from that second door 30 seconds later. Lily had studied his face on her laptop screen. The photograph, the precise light, the angle that showed his full face. She knew what he looked like when he didn't know he was being seen. Now she watched him walk into a room where he did know he was being seen, and she cataloged the difference. He was heavier than the photograph suggested. Not physically, the photograph had him accurately, but the weight was internal, the specific gravity of someone who had made a decision and was now living inside it and finding it heavier than the anticipation had been. He sat down beside Marcus without looking at Damien directly. His eyes went to the table, to his hands, then, with what was clearly an act of will, to Damien's face. "Garrett," Damien said. One word. His voice was completely level. Garrett Cole's jaw moved once. He didn't respond. Marcus said, "I want to begin by saying that this situation has been deeply unfortunate. There have been misunderstandings at multiple levels, and I believe—" "Where's the recording?" Damien said. Marcus paused. The pleasantness recalibrated. "I'm not sure what you—" "The edited recording of Sandra Ewan's call. You showed it to Garrett's people tonight. You've been holding it as leverage." Damien's voice was the same level it had been in the car and in the gutted building and in the hotel room. That complete compression, nothing leaking out. "I'm not here to have a conversation around the edges of what this meeting is. I'm here because you wanted me in this room. Tell me what you actually want." Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he sat down across from Damien and folded his hands on the table, and the pleasantness didn't leave his face, but the quality of it changed. It became less performed and more structural, the expression of a man who had decided that the approach he'd planned needed an adjustment. His hand moved to the water glass again. Another half-inch. Lily's camera was up. She was shooting, not continuously, selectively, the way she always shot, choosing moments rather than spraying frames. She watched Marcus's face through the viewfinder, and she watched Garrett Cole's hands, and she watched the door to the prep kitchen corridor, which had not opened. "You have a memory card," Marcus said. "It contains an image that, without context, could be misinterpreted as evidence of coordination between myself and a member of your organization." His tone was the tone of someone reading from a document they'd memorized, measured, grammatically clean. "I want to provide that context. I want to explain the nature of my relationship with Garrett, and why those meetings were, in fact, sanctioned at a level of your organization that may not have been visible to you directly." Lily lowered the camera slightly. Not all the way. Just enough to see the room without the frame. Damien said, "Sanctioned by whom?" "By the governance structure you established," Marcus said. "The delegated authority framework that allows senior operational personnel to engage in partnership discussions within defined parameters." He paused. Garrett was operating within that framework. The meetings were properly authorized. The consulting structure that resulted was properly documented. The question of your personal awareness is a question you're about to answer for me, Damien said, by suggesting that my lack of personal awareness was itself a governance failure, that I signed off on a framework and then failed to oversee it. He looked at Marcus. "Which makes me responsible for everything that happened under it." Marcus held his gaze. Something moved behind his eyes. The adjustment of a man who has found the response he wanted in the place he expected it, and is now confirming that his preparation was accurate. "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that a mutual acknowledgement of how these processes evolved would serve everyone's interests, including yours." "My interests," Damien said. "A public dispute benefits no one. The organization's reputation, your personal reputation, these are assets that both of us have reasons to protect." Marcus's voice remained pleasant, remained measured. "A collaborative statement, a shared accounting of how certain structural decisions developed over time. That's all I'm proposing." Lily watched Garrett Cole's hands on the table. They were flat, pressed down, like he was using the table's surface to keep them still. His eyes were on the space between Damien and Marcus, not on either face. The specific nowhere look of someone who has rehearsed being in a room and is finding that the rehearsal didn't account for the actual weight of it. Damien said, "Show me the recording." Marcus paused. "If you want a collaborative statement, I need to understand what I'm collaborating with. Play the recording. A silence. Marcus's hand moved to the water glass. Lily's camera was back up, the lens on his face, the slight magnification of the viewfinder showing her the specific quality of his recalculation. That's not, Marcus began. You played it for Sandra Ewan at 2 in the morning to frighten her into compliance. You played it for Garrett, presumably, to confirm his decision to come here. Play it for me. Another silence. Longer. In the silence, Lily heard something from the direction of the prep kitchen door. Not a sound exactly, more the cessation of a quality of quiet, the kind of shift you feel more than hear. Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a small device, a slim recorder, the kind that looked like a thick pen, and set it on the table. He pressed play. Sandra Ewan's voice came into the room with the particular tinny quality of a recording played back on small speakers. Her voice was professional, measured, explaining a process, the Delran authorization pathway. And then, and this was where Lily felt it in her chest, the specific wrongness of it, the sentence changed direction. A join so clean it was nearly inaudible. Sandra's voice describing something she had never described, the routing structure, the subsidiary loans, a process that had not existed when Sandra made this call. It was immaculate. It was the most sophisticated audio fabrication Lily had heard outside of a production environment. And it was, even knowing what it was, genuinely difficult to hear as a fabrication. Damien listened to the whole thing. He didn't move. When it ended, he looked at the recorder on the table. That's not Sandra's voice, he said. It's her voice used to say something she never said. And you know that, and I know that, and the question is whether the people you intend to play it for will be able to tell the difference. Marcus said, the question is whether you want them to have to. And that was when Garrett Cole looked up from the table. He looked at Damien, not at the space between them, at Damien's face. And what Lily saw in his face through the viewfinder, she pressed the shutter without deciding to, the image was just there and her finger found it, was not the calculation she'd expected. It was not the face of a man who had made a decision and was committed to it. It was the face of a man who was watching the decision he'd made become something different from what he'd been told it would be. Garrett, Marcus said, a single word with a particular weight in it, a reminder. Garrett Cole's eyes moved to Marcus, then back to Damien, then to the recorder on the table. That's not what you told me it was, Garrett said. The room went completely still. Marcus's hand moved to the water glass, and this time he didn't move it half an inch. He closed his fingers around it and held it, the first non-controlled gesture Lily had seen from him. Garrett, Marcus said again. The same word. Different temperature. You told me the recording was documentation, that it showed Damien's verbal authorization of the partnership structure. Garrett's voice was not steady, but it was getting there, the way a voice gets steady when someone is deciding to say the thing they came into a room not intending to say. You didn't tell me it had been altered. The recording reflects something Sandra Ewan never said. Garrett looked at the recorder. I've known Sandra for 8 years. I know how she talks about authorization pathways. That's not how she talks about authorization pathways. His jaw moved. You told me this was documentation, Marcus. You told me it would hold up. It will hold up to anyone who doesn't have 11 years of familiarity with her. It won't hold up to a forensic analysis, Lily said. Every head in the room turned toward her. She lowered the camera. She was done shooting. She had what she had, and now what the room needed was not a witness behind a lens, but a voice. Digital audio has metadata too, she said. File creation dates, encoding signatures, edit markers. If that recording was manipulated, the manipulation left traces in the file structure. The same way a photograph carries its history in its metadata, an audio file carries its edit history in its headers. She looked at Marcus. You know that, which is why this was never going to court. It was only ever going to be played for people under pressure who didn't have time to analyze it. Marcus looked at her. The pleasant expression was gone. What was underneath it was not rage. It was cooler than rage, the expression of a man looking at a variable he had not included in his calculation and assessing the damage of the omission. Who are you? He said. Someone who found a memory card in a hallway, she said. and spent tonight learning what was on it. Garrett Cole stood up. It was not a dramatic gesture. He didn't knock the chair back. He just stood, the way people stand when they've been sitting in something too long and their body has decided it's finished. He put his hands on the table and looked at Damien with the specific exhaustion of someone who has spent 9 years building something and the last several months quietly dismantling it, and has only just, in this room, at this hour, understood the full weight of that accounting. "I can give you the communications," Garrett said. "The messages from Marcus, the instructions. I kept them." A pause. "I kept them because—" He stopped. The reason he'd kept them didn't matter now, or it mattered too much to say. "I have them. I can give you everything." Marcus said, "Garrett, stop. The partnership structure, the governance resolutions, the timeline of every instruction I received, I have documentation going back 14 months. Garrett's eyes didn't move from Damien. "I was told it was a restructuring. I was told it would benefit the organization. I was told that you had agreed to a strategic realignment and that my role was to implement it without creating paper trails that would complicate the transition." He exhaled. "I didn't know about the recording. I didn't know what he was going to do with Sandra." "Garrett." Marcus's voice had dropped an octave. It was the voice under the pleasant voice, and it was not pleasant. "If you say another word in this room, every piece of paper you've signed in the last 14 months becomes your problem entirely. Every document, every resolution, every signature, it all points to you. Not to me, to you." Garrett looked at him, and what Lily saw on Garrett Cole's face in that moment, what she had already captured in the frame she'd pressed without deciding to, the image that was already on her card, was the expression of a man looking at the person who had used him and seeing it, finally, clearly, the way you only see a thing when the angle changes and the light catches it right. "I know," Garrett said. "It points to me. It's been pointing at me the whole time." He looked back at Damien. "That was always the plan." In the silence that followed, Lily heard the prep kitchen door open, and Rena Yates walked into the room. She had her phone in her hand. The recording app was open on the screen, the red indicator showing active, and she held it up so Marcus Voss could see it clearly before she said a single word. Marcus went completely still. And in that stillness, in the 5 seconds before anyone in the room spoke again, before the next move was made, before the shape of the next hour became clear, Lily raised her camera one more time. Not to document, not to gather evidence, because in the face of Marcus Voss, in the moment he understood that the room was no longer his, there was a truth that had nothing to do with corporate structure or fabricated recordings or the ownership chains of companies inside companies. A truth that was simply human, the specific expression of a man watching the thing he'd built with great care and patience come apart at the precise point he'd been certain it couldn't. She pressed the shutter. And the flash, in the early gray light of the room on the 14th floor, was the first bright thing the morning had produced. The flash died, and the room held its breath. Marcus Voss did not move. Not immediately. He stood with the stillness of a man whose entire operational system had just received information it hadn't been designed to process. And the stillness was the processing. The same precise calculation Lily had watched him run all morning, but running now against a different set of inputs. A set that included Rena Yates standing in the doorway with an active recording on her phone and a 4-month case file in her jacket, and the specific posture of someone who has been waiting a long time for this exact room and is not impressed by it. Then Marcus moved his hand away from the water glass. He sat down. He sat down slowly, with the deliberateness of someone choosing the terms of their own stillness. And he folded his hands on the table, and he looked at Rena, and then at Lily, and then at Damien, and the pleasant expression was gone entirely now. Not replaced by anything dramatic, just absent. The face underneath it neither warm nor cold, but precise, the expression of a man shifting from one mode of operation to another. "You've been thorough," he said. "More thorough than you planned for," Rena said. She stayed in the doorway. She didn't come further into the room, which was itself a choice. Staying at the threshold meant she had an exit, and it meant the room's geometry hadn't fully accepted her yet, which kept Marcus calculating rather than acting. The corporate registry trace goes back 14 months. the ownership chain through the Singapore nominee to the purchase options on Vail's subsidiaries. The timeline of Garrett's governance resolutions mapped against your meeting dates. She paused. And the GPS metadata in the photograph, which places the meeting location inside a property held by your second-layer entity. Marcus looked at her for a moment, then at Damien. You brought an auditor, he said. She brought herself, Damien said, and a photographer. His eyes moved to Lily, who has been shooting this room since I walked in. He held her gaze. What exactly do you have on that card? Enough, Lily said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you need right now. She held the camera with both hands, not raised, not threatening, just present. You came into this meeting thinking you were adding to a record. You weren't. You were completing one. Something shifted behind Marcus's eyes. Not fear. She still didn't see fear from him, and she filed that because men who didn't experience fear in rooms like this one were different from men who hid it. They had a different operational center, a different place from which they made decisions, and that place was harder to reach with ordinary pressure. Garrett Cole had not sat back down. He was standing behind his chair with both hands on the back of it, and the posture was the posture of someone who had decided something and was staying decided through the sheer act of remaining upright. Marcus looked at him. Sit down, Garrett. No. The word was small, and it was enormous. One syllable that contained 9 years of architecture and the moment of its demolition. Marcus's jaw moved once. You understand what you're doing. I've been understanding it for the last 3 hours, Garrett said. Since you played me that recording and I heard Sandra's voice say something Sandra never said. He exhaled. It was a rough sound, the kind that comes from somewhere below the chest. You told me this was a restructuring. You told me Vail had agreed in principle and that my role was implementation. You told me... I told you what you needed to hear to do what needed to be done, Marcus said. His voice had changed again, not warmer, but more direct. The stripped-down version of the voice under the pleasant voice. And you did it. And everything you signed, everything you authorized, everything you documented over 14 months. That's not a conversation, Garrett. That's a record. And that record exists whether you're in this room or not. I know, Garrett said. I told him that already. Then you know that your decision right now has consequences that don't go away because you've had a change of heart in a dining room at 6 in the morning. I know what the consequences are. Do you? Marcus leaned forward slightly, just slightly, the specific compression of a man making a point with his body rather than his voice. Your name is on 37 internal documents. Your signature authorized the consulting structure, the subsidiary loan framework, and the governance resolutions that enabled both. If this goes in front of a regulatory body, a board, or a court, any of those venues, the documentation trail ends at you, not at me. There is nothing that connects me to those documents except your word, and your word is the word of a man who just told a room full of witnesses that he executed a plan he now claims he didn't understand. The room was very quiet. Lily was watching Garrett's hands on the back of the chair, the knuckles. The specific whitening of knuckles when a grip is the only thing holding something together. There's the photograph, Damien said. Marcus looked at him. Garrett and you, 7 weeks ago. The meeting where the third phase was laid out. Damien's voice was the same level it had been all night. The photograph has intact metadata, including GPS coordinates that place it at a property in your corporate structure. It's been forensically authenticated. He paused. And Garrett just confirmed the meeting happened and confirmed its purpose in a recorded room. A silence. Marcus looked at Rena's phone, at the red indicator. He held the look for a long moment with the expression of a man doing a very specific kind of arithmetic. Turn that off, he said. No, Rena said. I'll have this building's security. Call them, Lily said. Marcus looked at her. She met it. She'd been meeting harder looks than his for 15 years, and she wasn't going to stop now, not in this room, not with the card in her pocket and the images on her camera and the 7 a.m. email ticking down somewhere in the architecture of the internet. Call security, she said again. And while you're doing that, consider that the recording Rena has been running since she walked through that door has already been transmitted to a cloud archive. It's not on the phone anymore. The phone is just the indicator. She watched his face. You can take the phone. You can remove us from the building. The recording is already gone. It wasn't entirely true. The transmission was running but not complete. She didn't know the building's upload speed. She was giving him a version of the truth that was structurally accurate and temporally compressed. But she said it the way she said everything when the stakes required it, without flinching, with the specific confidence of someone who has looked at the image and knows what's in it. Marcus's hand moved, not to the water glass this time, to the phone in his pocket. Damien said, "Don't." One word, the same compression, but something underneath it now that hadn't been there before, right? Not quite heat, but the particular warmth of a man who has been running very cold for a very long time and has reached a room where he doesn't have to anymore. Marcus looked at him. "You came into this meeting to get my voice on a record," Damien said. "You wanted me to say something, anything, that could be cut and placed alongside Sandra's fabricated statement and the photograph and presented as a coherent narrative where I authorized everything, where I was the architect." He stood up, slowly, deliberately, using his height the way he used his stillness, not as threat, but as architecture. "I came into this meeting to give you the chance to stop." "Generous," Marcus said. His voice had recovered some of its surface quality, the pleasantness returning like a reflex even now, the professional habit of a man who had been performing reasonableness his entire career. "Given that you've had a very dramatic morning." 14 months, Damien said. "You spent 14 months building a structure designed to take what I built and make it yours. You used a man who trusted me to implement it. You fabricated evidence against a woman who's been loyal for 11 years. You came into this room tonight to put the final piece in place." He paused. "I want to know why." Marcus looked at him. The pleasantness stayed, but behind it, in the place where Lily had been watching all morning, something moved, something that was not recalculation, but something older and less controlled. "Because you have too much," Marcus said. The simplicity of it landed in the room like something dropped from a height. "You have too much, and you hold it too tightly, and you built it in a way that makes it impossible to reach through legitimate means." He held Damien's gaze, and his voice was for the first time all morning not performing anything. "I have spent 20 years in the same ecosystem as you. I have built things that were good, that were viable, that could have been significant. And every time I reached the point of scale, your organization was the wall. Your contracts, your infrastructure relationships, your distribution agreements. Every major opportunity for the last decade has had your name as the prior encumbrance." He paused. "I tried to negotiate. I tried to partner. I tried every legitimate approach available to me." The pleasantness had gone again, and what was left was simply what it was. The specific exhaustion and bitterness of a man who has wanted something for a long time and turned himself into something else in the wanting. "So I found another approach." The room breathed. Garrett Cole made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a laugh, the involuntary exhalation of someone who has just heard the reason they were used and found it smaller than they expected. "You did all of this," Garrett said, "because you wanted market access." "I did all of this," Marcus said quietly, "because I built things worth having, and I was blocked at every turn by someone who didn't build them better than me, just earlier." He looked at Damien. "You know that's true." "It may be true," Damien said. "It doesn't make what you built in the last 14 months anything other than what it is." "No," Marcus said. "It doesn't." A silence. And in the silence, Lily heard something she hadn't heard since they walked into the building. Movement in the corridor outside. More than one person. The specific cadence of people who are coordinating their approach rather than walking independently. She looked at the door. Rena had heard it too. Her posture changed. Not retreat, adjustment. The shift of someone recalculating the room's geometry. Marcus looked at the door and something crossed his face. Not triumph, exactly. Something adjacent to it. The expression of a man who had been running 2 tracks simultaneously and had just received confirmation that the second track was arriving on schedule. "I said I wasn't expecting a third party," Marcus said. "I didn't say I wasn't prepared for one." The door opened. Two men, not hotel security. The wrong build, the wrong clothes, the particular blankness of expression that doesn't come from a service industry job, but from a different kind of professional training. They stopped inside the doorway and they didn't move further, which meant they were there to define the room rather than to act in it. Not yet. And behind them, in the corridor, visible through the open door, a third man on a phone, speaking quietly, whose presence Lily registered in her peripheral vision before she registered his face, and then she registered his face, and the image landed in her chest like something physical. She had seen that face before, not in person, in her laptop screen, in the compressed image on the memory card, at the table in the room with the GPS coordinates embedded in forgotten metadata. Garrett Cole. Except Garrett Cole was standing 3 feet to her left with his hands on the back of a chair. She looked at the man in the corridor, then at the man beside her. Same face. Different tension in the jaw, different set to the shoulders, the specific physical differences that accumulate between people who share genetics but not decisions. His brother, Rena said quietly. She was close to Lily now, having moved from the doorway when the two men entered, moved toward the room's center, rather than its exit, which was either courage or the recognition that the exit was no longer viable. Garrett Cole looked at the corridor, at the man who shared his face. "Daniel," he said. His voice had changed completely. All the weight of the last few hours went somewhere else, and what came out was something rawer, more stripped. "What are you doing here?" The man in the corridor, Daniel Cole, lowered the phone. He looked at his brother with an expression that was complicated and tired and not entirely cold. "Marcus called me an hour ago, said you were making a mistake." "Marcus called you?" "He said you were about to make a decision that would end with you carrying all of it." Daniel's voice was even, older sibling even, the particular register of someone who has spent a lifetime being the stable one. "I came to make sure you didn't. By standing in the doorway with two men who aren't hotel staff. By being present." Daniel looked at Damien, then at the room, at Rena's phone, at Lily's camera, at the pages spread on the table, at the recorder Marcus had produced and left there. He was taking the same inventory Lily had taken when she walked in, and she could see him process it the same way she had, filing and sorting and coming to his own conclusions. "How far has this gone?" "Far enough," Garrett said. "Garrett, he fabricated a recording, Daniel. Sandra Ewan's voice saying something she never said. That's not restructuring. That's not strategy. That's—" He stopped. The word he was reaching for didn't come, or came and was too simple, too small for what he'd found himself standing in. "I have 37 documents with my name on them." "I know," Daniel said. "I've seen the structure. Marcus walked me through it 6 months ago." A pause. "I told him it was too aggressive." The room temperature changed. Marcus said, "Daniel." "I told him," Daniel said, still looking at his brother, "that the attribution risk was too concentrated. That if it went wrong, the person holding the exposure was you and not him." He took a step into the room past the two men in the doorway. "He told me the controls were sufficient." "They were sufficient," Marcus said, "until someone started investigating from the outside." "They were sufficient until you fabricated evidence," Daniel said. "That's a different thing." He looked at Marcus. "I'm not here to protect a fabrication. I'm here because my brother is in a room where his name is on 37 documents, and I want to know what his options are." Marcus's pleasant expression had entirely disintegrated. What was left was not rage. She still didn't see rage from him, and she still filed that. But something tight and precise and reconfiguring, the expression of a man watching the architecture of his plan develop a load-bearing failure. "His options," Marcus said carefully, "are the same as they were an hour ago. The documentation points at him. The question is whether the people reviewing it have context or don't." "And you provide the context," Lily said. Marcus looked at her. "That's what you've been building," she said. "You're not just the mastermind. You're the context provider. The photograph, the recording, the financial structure. None of them point at you directly because you were never going to be the one standing in front of a board or a regulator. You were going to be the one sitting across from them saying, here's what actually happened. Here's the context. Here is my interpretation of these events. And your interpretation was already shaped by months of preparation." She looked at him steadily. That's why the recording mattered so much. You can explain a photograph. You can explain a corporate structure. But an authoritative voice saying the right words, even a fabricated version of it, gives your interpretation a sound. It makes it feel heard rather than constructed. Marcus said nothing. The problem, Lily continued, is that you're now in a recorded room where everything you've said in the last 20 minutes has become the actual context, not your prepared version, the real one. The two men in the doorway shifted, not moving forward, just the small, restless adjustment of people waiting for an instruction that wasn't coming. Damien looked at them, then at Marcus. "Call them off," Damien said. "They're not. Call them off." Still that same level, still nothing leaking. But the thing that had been in his voice since he stood up, that specific warmth under the compression, had weight now. The weight of a man who has been in rooms like this before and knows exactly what the next 10 seconds look like if the people in the doorway take a step forward. This ends here. Not in a corridor, not with anyone's hands on anyone. It ends in this room with the evidence that's already been gathered and the recording that's already transmitting and the conversation we've already had. The two men didn't move. Marcus looked at them, then back at Damien. The calculation ran. She could see it running, could see the inputs he was processing, the recording, the photography, Rena's case file, Daniel Cole standing inside the room now rather than outside it, Garrett's defection, the 7 a.m. email she'd set and not mentioned and wasn't going to. Marcus said quietly, "Stand down." The two men withdrew into the corridor. The room exhaled. Garrett Cole let go of the chair back and his hands were shaking, sawing, not dramatically, just the fine tremor of hands that have been gripping something for too long, the specific physical aftermath of sustained tension releasing. He looked at them and then put them in his pockets. Daniel Cole came fully into the room and stood beside his brother and didn't touch him, which was somehow more of a statement than touching would have been. The presence of someone who has come to stand in the same room rather than pull you out of it. Rena's phone was still recording. She hadn't lowered it. Marcus sat at the table with his hands flat on its surface and looked at the space in front of him with the expression Lily had been waiting to see all morning. Not the collapse of a man, not drama, not the cinematic moment of defeat she'd seen in lesser rooms, just the specific flatness of a man who has run out of moves and is now simply in the present tense of it. "What do you want?" he said. "Not to the room. To Damien." "The purchase options voided," Damien said. "The consulting contracts terminated. The company structures you built dissolved with full documentation of their purpose and origin." He paused. "And a complete written account of everything Garrett was told, from the beginning, including the assurances you gave him and the specific misrepresentations you made about my awareness and agreement. That account incriminates me." "Yes." "You're asking me to chill out." "I'm telling you what the alternative looks like," Damien said. "The alternative is that everything Rena has built, everything Lily documented, everything Garrett just said in a recorded room goes to every relevant authority simultaneously, regulatory, legal, and public." He let that sit. "This way, you control the terms of the accounting. The other way, you don't control anything." Marcus looked at the recorder he'd placed on the table, the recorder with Sandra Ewan's fabricated voice on it. Lily watched his face. She had photographed people at the end of things before, at the end of marriages, of careers, of the versions of themselves they'd been presenting to the world. She knew what it looked like when a person arrived at the place where what they'd built finally showed them its actual dimensions. Marcus Voss looked at that place for a long moment. Then he reached out and picked up the recorder from the table and held it in his palm and looked at it, and Lily raised her camera one more time, not because she planned to, but because the image was there, the man and the device and the morning light coming through the window now with the first real color of dawn. And she pressed the shutter. "All right," Marcus said. Not to Damien, not to Rena. To the recorder in his hand in the specific tone of a man concluding an accounting with himself. He set it back on the table, and Damien said, "Rena." And Rena moved to the table with the folded pages from her jacket, and the room shifted into the different kind of work. Not confrontation anymore, but documentation. The careful, deliberate process of making permanent what had just happened, of giving it structure and language, and the specific gravity of a record. Lily lowered her camera. She was shaking slightly. She noticed it now that the room had changed register, the adrenaline finding nowhere to go and redistributing into her hands, the fine tremor that she'd been pressing back for the last 40 minutes surfacing in the absence of the pressure that had suppressed it. She pressed her hands together and breathed and looked out the window at the dawn coming in over Manhattan, the city going from silver to the first pale gold, the streets below beginning to show movement. She thought about the card in her pocket, the single photograph, the two men at the table and the patient composition of the image and the light that had recorded coordinates no one had thought to erase. She thought about a hotel corridor at 3 a.m. and a piece of plastic the size of a postage stamp catching the edge of her boot. Garrett Cole came to stand beside her at the window. He didn't speak. He just stood there and looked at the same city she was looking at, and she let him stand there because there wasn't anything to say, and sometimes the only thing available is the same view. "I kept the communications," he said finally. Quietly, not looking at her. "Everything Marcus sent me, every instruction. I told myself it was because I'm organized, because I keep records." A pause. "I think I knew. Some part of me knew." Lily looked at the city. "People keep things for the reason they need to keep them," she said. "You don't have to know why in advance." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that a photography thing?" "It's a human thing." She looked at the window. "We document what we're not ready to say yet." Across the room, Rena was speaking in her precise auditor's voice, laying out terms, and Damien was listening in his particular way, completely, without interrupting. And Marcus Voss was sitting across from them both, and had not spoken again but had not moved either, which was its own form of compliance. The compliance of a man who has reached the end of the architecture he built, and is waiting to find out what the structure looks like when someone else designs the next floor. Daniel Cole stood near the door. He had his phone out again, but he wasn't calling anyone. He was looking at his brother's back. The morning came fully through the window now, and somewhere in the city below, in the infrastructure of servers and accounts that Lily had been maintaining for 7 years against exactly this kind of morning, a timer ticked towards 7 a.m., and the email sat in its queue, and the evidence waited with the patience of evidence, the patience of things that are true, and have learned that the only thing required of them is to survive until someone is ready to look. Damien turned from the table and found her across the room, and the look he gave her was not gratitude. It was more specific than gratitude, the look of a man who has just seen something he didn't know he needed to see, which was someone standing at a window with a camera and shaking hands and not leaving. Lily held his gaze, and in the dining room on the 14th floor, with the city going gold outside and the recording still running and the pages spread on the table like the bones of a plan finally made visible, the last piece of what Marcus Voss had built for 14 months began, carefully and irrevocably, to come. The documentation took 4 hours. Not the dramatic 4 hours of confrontation and revelation, the other kind, the slower and in some ways harder kind, where the adrenaline drains out of a room and what remains is paperwork and precise language and the unglamorous work of making permanent what had happened in the space between a flash and a breath. Rena drove it. She had been building toward this for 4 months, and she knew exactly what she needed. The specific admissions, the structural acknowledgments, the chronology of instructions given and received. And she moved through it with the economy of someone who has rehearsed the process so many times that the actual execution of it feels almost anticlimactic. Marcus Voss cooperated. That was the word for it. Not confession, not remorse, not the cinematic collapse of a man who has finally seen himself clearly. Cooperation. The specific and bounded compliance of a man who has assessed his position and made a rational decision about which version of the next several years he preferred. He answered questions. He confirmed timelines. He signed the document that Rena had drafted from the pages in her jacket. Pages that turned out to be not just corporate registry printouts, but the skeleton of exactly this agreement, prepared weeks ago on the assumption that if they reached a room like this one, they would need the architecture already built. Lily watched him sign. She did not photograph it. Some moments were not images. They were just facts, and facts didn't need to be framed to be real. Garrett Cole gave his statement separately, in the corner of the room near the window where Lily had stood with him at dawn. A different kind of cooperation, less bounded, more costly, the the statement of a man who was accounting for something rather than managing something. He spoke for 40 minutes into Rena's phone, and he didn't ask for water, and he didn't stop to reconsider his phrasing. The communications he had kept, every message, every instruction, every careful formulation Marcus had used to make a demolition sound like a renovation, he transferred from his phone to Rena's encrypted archive before the sun had cleared the building line. Daniel Cole left before the statement was finished. He paused at the door and looked at his brother's back, and Garrett did not turn, and Daniel stood there for 3 seconds. Lily counted them the way she had counted the rings of Sandra Ewan's phone, the way she counted things when she needed to know exactly how long a moment lasted. And then he walked out. No word, no gesture. Just the door closing behind him with the soft, definitive sound of a properly weighted door in an expensive building. Lily thought about what that cost. She didn't say it to anyone. At 9:17 in the morning, Damien's phone showed a message from the email account she'd set up the night before. The 7 a.m. send had fired. The journalist had the file. Lily had almost canceled it 3 times during the documentation process, had taken her phone out twice and held it, looking at the interface, and twice had put it back. Insurance didn't stop being insurance because the crisis had moved into paperwork. The file was out. If everything else held, the journalist would hold it too. If everything else failed, she wouldn't. She sent a message to the journalist's direct number. Hold, will confirm by noon. The reply came in 40 seconds. Confirmed. Clock is running. She showed it to Damien. He read it and handed the phone back without speaking. And what was on his face when he did, it was not gratitude. She still didn't have a word for the thing his face did when he looked at her. And she was starting to think that was by design, that some expressions don't come with words because the words would make them smaller. Marcus left at 10. 2 of his own people walked him out. Not the men from the doorway, who had dispersed somewhere in the corridor during the documentation hours, but a lawyer who arrived at 8:45 with a case and a face like a closed door, and a second person who didn't speak and whose role Lily never identified. The lawyer reviewed the signed document for 22 minutes, made one request for a language change that Rena declined in 3 words, and then nodded once, and Marcus stood and buttoned his jacket and looked at the room. He looked at Lily last. She didn't raise the camera. She looked back. "You're good at your work," he said. She didn't answer because it wasn't a compliment, and they both knew it. It was an acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement of a man who has been beaten by something he underestimated and is filing the information for future reference. She didn't need his assessment of her work. She didn't need anything from him. He left. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet after long effort. Not empty, but settled. The specific piece of a space that has been used hard and is now at rest. Rena sat at the table with the signed pages and her phone and her folded corporate registry printouts and the hand-drawn diagram with its chains of ownership, and she looked at all of it for a moment, and then she put it away piece by piece with the same economy she'd used for everything else. When she was done, she put her elbows on the table and pressed her palms against her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds of being something other than completely composed. Then she straightened. "Sandra needs to know it's over," she said. "I'll call her," Damien said. "The regulatory notification needs to go in this week. The purchase options have a 30-day dissolution window under the agreement. I'll manage that process, but I need access to your legal team." She paused. "Is that going to be a conversation?" "No," Damien said. "I'll make the introduction today." "And Garrett?" A silence. The particular silence that had surrounded Garrett Cole's name all morning, heavier than the other silences, carrying more history. Garrett had left 20 minutes before Marcus. He'd given his statement and transferred his files and then stood up from the window corner and looked at Damien and opened his mouth once and closed it, and the thing he hadn't been able to say was visible in his face. Not an apology exactly, because apologies are for situations where the damage is bounded and repairability is at least theoretically in the room. This wasn't that. 9 years of architecture deliberately dismantled from inside. There wasn't a word for what you said after that. Damien had looked at him for a long moment. Then he'd said, "Go home, Garrett." Not cold, not forgiving, just the plainest possible instruction, the kindness of telling someone where to go when they no longer know. Garrett had gone. He'll cooperate with whatever process follows, Damien said now, in answer to Rena's question. He's already cooperating. His communications are the most important piece of what we have. They show the full timeline and the specific misrepresentations Marcus made. He paused. What happens to him after that is between him and whatever's coming. Rena nodded. She looked like she was going to say something else and decided against it. Lily understood the decision. Some things didn't need to be said. Some things were just true, and saying them didn't make them more true, only louder, and loudness wasn't always the same as clarity. She started packing her camera bag. She'd been moving on autopilot for the last 2 hours, had gotten coffee from the building's lobby cafe at some point, couldn't remember when. The cup was cold on the table beside her, and she didn't remember drinking most of it. Her body was past the specific threshold where tiredness becomes something structural, something that lives in the bones rather than the muscles. She had been awake for, she counted back, 27 hours. She had a conference shoot in 6 hours that she was going to have to either hand off or push through, and she was going to push through because she always pushed through, because that was one of the things she was. She had the card in her inner jacket pocket. She took it out and set it on the table. This should go somewhere official, she said. Original metadata, full chain of custody. Rena's analysis, my forensic work, the authentication documentation. I'll build the evidence package, Rena said. I need you to write up the authentication process, your methodology, the tools you used, the specific metadata fields and what they showed. It needs to be written in a format that survives legal review. I can do that today. Tonight is fine. You look like you need to sleep. I look like I need 4 years of sleep, Lily said. I'll do it today. Rena almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely there. But Lily caught it the way she caught things, the small movements that contained more than the large ones. She finished packing the bag and stood and looked at the room one more time. The dawn light was gone now, replaced by the harder, full morning light that came without atmosphere, that showed everything as it actually was, rather than as it might have been. The table with the water glass Marcus had moved a centimeter at a time, the chairs they'd all occupied, the window where she and Garrett Cole had stood looking at the same city and not finding anything to say about it. Damien was looking at her from across the room. I'll walk out with you, he said. Rena was already on her phone. A different call, probably Sandra, the next item in the sequence that would take her through the rest of this day and into the next, and the several weeks following. She lifted one hand briefly in something that wasn't quite a wave and wasn't quite a dismissal, but contained elements of both, and Lily picked up her bag and walked with Damien to the door. The corridor was empty. The elevator came immediately, which felt wrong. Everything had been so deliberately paced and resistant all night that the simple compliance of an elevator arriving felt almost suspicious. They rode down in silence that was different from the silences of the night before. Those had been working silences, filled with the active processing of people in a situation together. This one was quieter, more personal. The lobby was beginning to fill with morning business. People with badges and briefcases and coffees, the ordinary forward motion of a weekday that had no information about what had happened in the dining room on the 14th floor and would never need to. They walked out onto the street. The city at 10:30 in the morning was a different creature from the city at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or the silver pre-dawn of 6. It was full and loud and purposeful, and the sun was genuinely warm on Lily's face, the first warmth she'd felt since before the Meridian Hotel, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just let it be warm. Damien stood beside her. He had his phone in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. Sandra, he said. I should call her. Yes, Lily said. He didn't move to make the call. She looked at him. The morning light on his face showed what the utility pack light and the car glow in the dining room's controlled overhead fixtures hadn't. The specific cost of the night, the hours and the texture of his skin, the fine lines around his eyes that weren't visible in the compressed expressions he'd been wearing for the past 7 hours. He looked older. He also looked more like himself, whatever that meant. Whatever version of himself existed under the architecture of how he usually presented. She thought about what she'd said to him in the hotel room, a man who was scared but didn't know how to be scared. He still didn't entirely know, but he was less defended about not knowing. That was something. The card, he said. Rena has it. I meant, he paused. You could have left it on the floor. I know. You could have put it under the door of 4114 and gone to sleep. I know. You chose to... I picked it up, she said. I didn't choose anything yet. I just picked it up. She looked at the street. The choosing happened later, in increments. He was quiet for a moment. Is that how it usually goes for you? Every time. She shifted the camera bag on her shoulder. The moment looks small. Then you're in something. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she felt it the way she felt the sun, not uncomfortable, just present, the specific weight of being actually looked at rather than assessed. Thank you, he said. She had been waiting for this and had been preparing to deflect it, and when it arrived, she found that she didn't want to deflect it. It was genuine, and it was simple, and it deserved a genuine and simple response. You're welcome, she said. He almost smiled. It was closer than the almost smile in the hotel room, had more of the surface of it, the specific warmth of an expression that had to travel some distance to get there and arrived slightly out of breath. I have calls to make, he said. I have a conference shoot at 4. You haven't slept. I'm aware. Lily, her name in his voice. She had not heard him say it until now, and the specific sound of it was more personal than she was entirely prepared for. After the calls, after the legal process starts, and the regulatory notifications go in, and the structure unwinds, there will be a point where the immediate urgency is over, and there are still things that need to be said. He held her gaze. I'd like to say them. She held his gaze back. She thought about what she'd told Garrett Cole at the window. We document what we're not ready to say yet. She thought about the photograph on her card, the one she'd taken of Damien in the hotel room in the first moments, before she knew anything, the image of a man in a doorway recalibrating toward a stranger with a camera and deciding in 4 seconds to tell her the truth. She hadn't looked at that frame yet. She didn't need to. She knew it was there. Find me at the exhibition, she said. He looked at her. 3 weeks, she said. I have a show, a gallery in Chelsea. She shifted the bag. Come and see what I made of all this. He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded. Just once. The specific nod of a man making a commitment he intends to keep. She turned and walked. She didn't look back, not because she was being dramatic about it, but because some exits are better made cleanly, and she had learned that the hard way a long time ago in a different city with a different person, and she was not going to unlearn it now. She canceled the 7 a.m. journalist email at 11:43, sent a message confirming to hold indefinitely, and received a 2-word reply that meant the journalist would sit on it until Lily told her otherwise or the story broke through other channels. The insurance was still there. It didn't expire. She would leave it in place until the regulatory process was far enough along to make it redundant, and then she would decide what to do with it. And the journalist would understand because the journalist was a professional, and professionals understood the difference between a story that needed to run now and a story that needed to wait until the damage it prevented had been made permanent. She slept for 3 hours, set an alarm, got up and went to the conference shoot. She was functioning on the specific autopilot that comes after extreme situations, a kind of heightened clarity that lives in the body rather than the mind, the instinct taking over while the conscious parts of her caught up. She shot the conference well. She always shot well on autopilot, had discovered this early in her career, and had never entirely made peace with what it implied about the relationship between thinking and seeing. She wrote the authentication methodology document that night, 8 pages. Precise, formatted for legal review, exactly what Raina had asked for. She sent it at 11 p.m. and received a read receipt 30 seconds later, which meant Rena was still awake, which did not surprise her. She did not hear from Damien for 4 days. On the 5th day, she received an email. It was a formal address she didn't recognize, a subsidiary name, and it took her a moment to understand that this was how he operated in the ordinary world, through structures, through the appropriate channels, through the infrastructure of professional distance. The email said the regulatory notification had been filed, that the purchase option's dissolution was underway, that the evidence package Rena had built, including Lily's authentication work, had been received by the relevant parties. It said Sandra Ewan had been formally cleared of any involvement. It said Garrett Cole was cooperating with the process through his own counsel. and had provided the complete archive of his communications with Marcus Voss. It said the process would take months. It said it was moving. At the bottom, below the formal language and the legal names, there was one more line, not on letterhead, just 3 weeks. I'll be there. Lily read that line twice and then closed the email and went back to work. She spent those 3 weeks in the way she always spent time after something large, by photographing the small things, the close things, the ordinary world that had no knowledge of hotel corridors or dining rooms, or the GPS coordinates embedded in the light of a single image. She shot a woman at a fish market who had been selling the same spot for 30 years. She shot the construction of a wall in a neighborhood that was being rebuilt. She shot a man teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle in a park at 8 in the morning. The specific moment when he let go and the girl didn't know yet, the moment of the untethered and unaware. She was choosing which of the night's photographs to include in the show. It was not a simple choice. She had 12 images from the dining room on the 14th floor, Rena and her phone in the doorway, Marcus Voss's hand on the water glass, Garrett Cole's knuckles on the back of the chair, Marcus looking at the recorder in his palm, and the one she'd taken before she knew she was taking it. Garrett, in the moment he understood what he'd been made into. The expression she'd caught because her finger had found the shutter before her mind decided to, the image of a man arriving at himself too late and not looking away from the arrival. She chose 7. She printed them at a scale that was slightly larger than comfortable, not monumental, just present enough that you had to make a choice about whether to look at them closely or from a distance, and the choice you made said something about you. She did not include the photograph from the memory card. That belonged somewhere else, to a legal file, to a record, to the specific chain of custody that Rena had built and was managing. It had done its work. It had been found and analyzed and authenticated and transmitted and deployed, and its work was not the work of a gallery. The show opened on a Thursday. The gallery in Chelsea was the kind of space that had been an industrial building long enough ago that the industrial bones were now the aesthetic, exposed brick, concrete floors, the structural elements left visible because they were interesting, rather than because there was no budget to cover them. The light was good. Lily had worked with the gallerist on the placement, and the gallerist had trusted her, which was one of the reasons she kept coming back to this space. 40 people came in the first hour. She knew some of them and didn't know others, and stood near the back of the space and watched them move through it, the way she always watched people move through her work, looking for the places they stopped, the images that held them, the ones they walked past. Most people stopped at the Garrett image. They stood in front of it for longer than they stood in front of anything else, and she thought about why. Not the technical quality, though it was technically precise, but the specific quality of the thing she'd captured without intending to. The truth in an image, she had spent 15 years learning, was not in what you aimed at. It was in what was actually there when the shutter opened. Rena arrived at 7:15 with the posture of someone who had come directly from a working day and had not entirely left it. She was still carrying her case. She stood in front of the Garrett image for a long time, and then she moved to the image of Marcus in his palm, and she stood in front of that one for longer. And when she turned, her face had the specific expression of someone who recognizes themselves in a record they didn't know was being made. "You see things," Rena said. "That's the job," Lily said. "It's more than the job." She looked at the image of Marcus. "He looks like what he is. I've been looking at financial documents for 4 months trying to describe what he is, and you just—" She stopped. "How do you do that?" "I wait," Lily said. "I wait until people stop performing, and then I press the button." Rena looked at her. "How long does that take?" "Depends on the person." She looked at the image of Marcus with his recorder. He was very controlled. Took most of the morning. She paused. The moment was when he understood the room wasn't his anymore. People stop performing when the performance stops working. Rena was quiet for a moment. Garrett's statement completed the regulatory filing. "The evidence is solid. The dissolution of the purchase options will be final in 11 days. She said it in the way she said most things, clean, precise, without decoration. But underneath it was something that had the quality of relief, the specific lightness of a weight that has been carried for so long you've forgotten what it felt like to be without it. It held. It held, Lily agreed. Sandra Ewan came at 7:45. Lily had not known she was coming and was not sure how she'd gotten the information about the show. Damien, probably, or Rena, or the particular network of people who had been inside the same event and connected themselves to one another through it. She was a small woman with careful clothing and the specific bearing of someone who has rebuilt their composure after it was taken from them, and values it more for having had to rebuild it. She looked at the 7 images, and she did not stop at the Garrett image or the Marcus image. She stopped at the image of Rena in the doorway with her phone, the red indicator showing the posture of someone who has been waiting a long time for a door to open. She stood there for a long time. Then she moved on. She found Lily near the back of the space, and she said very quietly, "Thank you for the authentication work. The methodology document was very precise." "I tried to make it legible for people who aren't in the industry," Lily said. "It was." A pause. "I listened to the real recording of my call after everything." She looked at a point somewhere past Lily's shoulder. "It's strange to hear your voice saying something you never said. Even knowing it's fabricated, it's very strange." She looked back. "I wanted you to know that I know what that card being found meant, what the metadata meant, what the whole sequence of the night meant." Her voice was even and careful, and beneath the evenness was something that was simply, plainly human. The acknowledgement of how close things had come to going differently. "It matters that you picked it up." Lily held her gaze. "I know," she said. Sandra nodded once and moved away into the gallery, and Lily stood where she was and looked at the room, at the people and the images, and the space between them where the work lived. And she thought about what it meant to document the things that happened. Not the events, not the facts, but the human cost of them. The knuckles on the chair, the palm with the recorder, the face in the moment of its own reckoning. She had spent 15 years learning that photography was not about capturing truth. It was about being present when truth surfaced, and being quick enough and still enough and honest enough in your own seeing to catch it before it went back under. She had been quick enough. She had been still enough. She was still deciding about the honest part. It was the ongoing work. It didn't finish. Damien came at 8:20. She saw him from across the room. He came in the way he moved through every space she'd seen him move through, with that architectural quality, the sense of a person who had measured the room before entering it. But there was something different in it tonight. The measuring was less defensive. He was reading the space because it interested him, not because he was calculating exits. He moved through the images slowly. He spent time with each one. When he reached the image of Rena in the doorway, he stopped for a long time. And then he moved to the Garrett image and stopped for longer. And when he finally reached the image at the end of the sequence, the last one she'd hung, the one she'd printed larger than all the others, he stopped, and he didn't move again for a while. It was the photograph she'd taken in the first 5 minutes, in the hotel room, before she knew anything. The man in the doorway in the corridor light, the moment of his recalibration, the 4-second calculation that had preceded every decision that followed. She'd been holding a memory card, and he'd seen it, and everything in his face had reorganized itself around the information. She'd caught that reorganization. The specific moment when a person decides to be honest rather than strategic. She'd hung it last because it was first, because the story she was telling with these images was not the story of an investigation or a confrontation or a conspiracy unwound. It was the story of a sequence of small decisions, the incremental choosing she'd described on the sidewalk. Each image was a decision. Strung together, they made something you could call a life, or a night, or the same thing. He stood in front of it for a long time. She came to stand beside him, not behind him, not at a professional distance, but beside him close enough that she could see what he was looking at. "You took this in the first 2 minutes," he said. "Closer to 3. Before you knew anything." "Before I knew the details," she said. "I knew something." She looked at the image. "I always know something. That's why I stopped." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you know?" "That you were scared and telling the truth, and that the two things were connected." She looked at the image of his face in the corridor light, the exact moment. "Scared people mostly lie. You didn't." A pause. "That meant something." He turned and looked at her. Not the calculating look, not the compressed look, not the architectural stillness. Just looking. The specific undefended act of looking at a person when you've decided to stop measuring the exposure. "I want to buy this one," he said. "It's not for sale." "Lily, it's not for sale because I'm keeping it," she said. "Not for a collection, just, I'm keeping it." She held his gaze. "The others are available." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked back at the image, and she watched the side of his face in the gallery light, the warmth of it, the specific gold of a space designed to show things accurately, to show things as they were rather than as they were performing. "The legal process will take months," he said. "I know. There are going to be points in it that are difficult. I imagine. I'll probably be unavailable, at intervals, for things that can't be." He stopped. The compression was there, but it was different. Not the professional suppression of the dining room, but the simpler difficulty of a man who has spent a long time being careful with language and is finding that carefulness insufficient for what he's trying to say. "I don't want to promise a version of things that the next several months don't let me deliver." "Then don't promise a version," she said. "Just come back to the gallery." He looked at her. "When it's over," she said, "when the process is done and the options are dissolved and the structure Marcus built is completely dismantled, and you've made all the calls you need to make, and Rena has filed everything that needs filing, come back here." She looked at the room. "I'll have new work up by then. Something that has nothing to do with any of this. And then we'll see what there is." She met his eyes. "I don't photograph things the way they might be. I photograph what's there when I press the button. I don't know what's going to be there." A pause. "But I want to look." He was quiet for a moment that had the quality of a held breath, of the space between the decision and the action, the specific half-second she always waited for. "All right," he said, the same word, same weight it had carried since a hotel corridor at 3 a.m, since the first time he'd said it and meant yes, and the second time he'd said it and meant "I believe you," and the third time he'd meant "I'm going to proceed as though this matters." The word he said when he'd made a decision and intended to keep it. She looked at the photograph, his face, the corridor, the moment before everything, and she thought about what Rena had asked her. How do you do that? How do you see it? "You wait," she had said. "You wait until people stop performing." She had waited 15 years. She had photographed hundreds of people and dozens of rooms and any number of moments that had felt significant in the instant of capture, and significant again in the print, and significant again when someone stood in front of them in a gallery and recognized something in them that they couldn't quite name. She had never been particularly careful with herself. She had been careful with the work and let the work carry what she couldn't say, and it had been enough most of the time. She thought it might be time to say some things out loud. She would figure out how. She would do it in increments, the same way she did everything that mattered. One decision at a time, each one small enough to make, each one leading to the next, the whole sequence becoming something larger than any single choice. The gallery filled around them and the images held their places on the walls, and outside, through the windows, the city went on in its indifferent and extraordinary way, carrying its millions of untold stories through the ordinary motion of a Thursday evening, most of them invisible, most of them unseen. She raised her camera, not at him, not at the room, at the window, at the city beyond it, at the dark glass reflecting the gallery's gold light back on itself, the doubled image of a space where people stood in front of truth and decided what to do with it. She pressed the shutter. The city looked back,